Ben, kunna se ta til, lads?
Tá mé go má.
Yeah, oh, you're a
Ta,
fan. No, Tommy, come on.
come on. I'm the one getting up at fucking, was it 5 a.m. in the morning now? Tommy, come on. Tisha, come on.
An bhfuil téise
Go on.
airt a film.
What's that?
An
What's that?
bhfuil
Tisha, I actually
airt.
never covered that in school. It's Tisha. One.
Téise. Tiredness. Are you tired?
Tiredness. Ah, that's why I never picked it up. Tiredness.
Because you were tired.
God damn! And it's a kind of more like a dullness. I feel more like a dullness than a tiredness. I did actually go to bed at 10, so it's not too bad. I think it's my brain isn't used to rolling out of bed at like what was it, 4 in the morning or something. So my brain is just like
Hi,
dull.
Tom.
Hi, Kat.
The boys are slowly coming in.
And women.
Aye. They're all here. I'm not what was it called? What would they say? What was it? Gender bias, you're all men to me,
Yeah. Well, in Kerry, lads means women and men.
Yeah, that's the same in Cork. I said that once. I was on a course and there was another Irish woman on it. And I turned around, this is, okay, lads, how y'all keeping? And two of the women got tick about it. And I couldn't understand. I was like, why are you getting tick about that? Like, and it was a woman is explaining, oh, kids these days, they say lads and they mean men and women. And I'm like, God, Jesus Christ.
I see my
Go on.
daughter's friends, all girls, and they use lads for themselves. Let's go, lads. What
Yeah.
we'll do tomorrow, lads.
That's what I was used to
Thank you
growing
very-
up.
It's a very, I think it's a thing. I don't know if you
Yeah.
find it in Limerick or Tipperary, but it's really, in Kerry, it's lads is everybody. Thank you very
Yeah,
much,
yeah.
Tom, for your condolences.
I don't know. This whole thing called gender,
Hi, Jim.
this whole thing called gender, I don't know. I think it's a new invention. People just came up with it recently, like in the last 2 years or so, I think. Because we didn't have gender before, did we? I don't know. I couldn't tell the difference between men and women. What? Is that a new thing, gender? I only came across it in the last 2 years. Thought men and women were the same, no?
As Kat is pointing out, there is a little thing about having a child. That is
I sure don't. I just went down to the hospital and got one. Isn't that where you get them? You just go down to the hospital and pick them up, no?
No, mine came with a stalk down the chimney.
Yeah.
All three of mine.
Yeah, that's my mother. My mother got them from the stalk. I don't know what you lads are talking about. Men and women.
Well,
Go
if you remember the Cuchulainn stories, there is a great punishment inflicted on the men of Ulster because they were very mean to a woman, in that they would be inflicted with the pangs of birth, which meant, I think, for once a month for 2 days they couldn't do anything. That's why, like in the Tón Bó why Cuchulainn is fighting the Connacht forces himself, because all the men of Ulster, the soldiers of Ulster, are at home feeling like they're giving birth, so they can't do anything. So,
and that's look at that, and that leads into that.
A logical fail. There is loads of Ulster guys in the Connacht army because they've been exiled, and the curse doesn't seem to affect them.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't remember. I can't remember 30 years ago anyone talking about mentioning anything about gender, to be honest with you. I just think it's a modern thing that y'all made up, to be honest with you. We'll just go and rewrite the books there and stuff, like, I don't know. Am I not right, Mihal? Do you know?
I'm not getting involved in this. I never. I don't fancy being cancelled.
What was it called? The Tom Bookule. I think that's a really, really, really important book. All jokes aside, it's definitely the Bible when it comes down to getting into Irish literature. And I say that because, what was it, 3 weeks ago, there were people online, and I was meant to make a short about this, and I never did. Maybe I'll do some time this week or so. And people talking about blood feuds in Ireland. And the problem I have about that is that people then start coming up with their own Celtic blood feuds of, clans fighting for 3,000 years non-stop and getting into blood feuds that their families can't even remember and stuff. And I'm like, this is complete and utter garbage. There's a massive lacking of understanding of why so many to it would get involved, and king groups would get involved with cattle raiding and the importance of cattle raiding within society. And I think when I've read a few historians, like the historian now has popped out of my head, but they always highlight that while blood feuds were cattle raiding was happening in 12th century Ireland, at the same time Henry II is involved with multiple civil wars. And the death rate in those civil wars are way more worse than the cattle raiding that's happening in Ireland. That ultimately cattle raiding in the 12th century Ireland brings down violence so much in Ireland. And that's why it's more important for people to get into cattle raiding warfare rather than having the tick for tat private wars that are happening in France and England in the 12th century. But I wouldn't just say go off and read the Tomba Cooley. I would definitely go off and tell you to read Fergus Kelly's The Brehon Law as well. It's the Bible of getting into
early Irish law.
medieval.
He doesn't use the word Brehon law. It's early Irish
Yeah.
law, isn't it?
Yeah. Fergus Kelly's Early Irish Law. I don't have the book next to me. Normally I do. I have the book to pop out with just there. It's somewhere, some pile somewhere. But Fergus Kelly's Early Irish Law and the Tomba Cooley. And actually, do you know, I think you should read The Early Fin Cycle as well by Kevin Murray. I think that's an absolutely fantastic book as well to give you the foundation understanding of it. Go on.
I think also it's very useful to go to the Celt or Celt site on UCC. They have almost every Gaelic manuscript, every Gaelic writing there. Not all has been translated, but most of the stuff there, and you can read through the annals, which give you. The annals are very complicated history, but they give you an insight. And just in relation to so-called blood feud, which for me doesn't exist, you'll see that most among the elites, among the lords, it's within the family who are fighting. You'll see that the son of the lord of this place gets killed by his brother. They're fighting over who's going to be the next one. Then you'll know, okay, let's say different septs do fight, but 2 years later they're on the same side. So I don't think they have the idea of blood feud because things were so dynamic that you were jumping from one side to another. Like people often say O'Neills were fighting O'Donnells some of the time, but then some O'Donnells were fighting alongside some O'Neills against other O'Donnells and O'Neills. It's a very complex thing. Quite often your brother, your cousin was someone you were out to get.
I think you should still read, what was it called? The Null Saga. The Null Saga gives you a fair idea of kind of Gaul, Gael, Irish Viking blood feuds. But the problem is with the Null Saga, which is in the Icelandic saga, is it gives you a good idea of kind of blood feuds that would occur only during that blur of the what was it called, the 10th 11th century. Like it's a book of its own period, of the Viking Age blood feuds. I wouldn't bring it into the 11th and 12th century and stuff. And even on top of that, these are blood feuds outside of early Irish law for sure, because of the fact that in Ireland, if you've got two groups of men fighting each other, two king groups at least fighting each other. The Brown judges are in there so fast to clear that up and to bring in fines that people have to pay fines. And if people don't pay fines, they're kicked out of the community.
Um,
Kicked out of the community. They're go on,
I I think you have to be a bit careful there
go
because
on.
the problem any legal system, any law faces
Mm,
is how to enforce it.
yeah.
Now, um, what most people, when talking about Brehon law, most people, Old Irish law, most people have a very idealistic view
Okay.
of it.
Mm,
It was something that changed. And then if I am from Kennelowen, if I
mm,
am from the Ona, and
yeah.
I burn a monastery and kill a few monks, nothing's going
Mm,
to happen to me. Sort of,
yeah.
yes, there are judges who will do stuff.
Mm,
So you have to pay this back. If
yeah.
like I might just set up a different monastery because I want the monastery in my area, and this happens.
Mm,
And
yeah.
at the same time, local lords no doubt executed people. You'll see
Yeah.
that the whole time.
Mm,
Like there's a bunch of outlaws or something. I just move in and hang them, sort of,
okay.
or kill them, or send them off to
Mm,
somewhere else. So you have to be very careful because there are laws, but how they actually operated in real life, in actual history, is very different to what many people. Because
Yeah, but I
mm,
think on the almost on the same side of the coin is that if there is a law being written by this, there's almost like a social understanding. It's almost like
yeah,
thou shalt not murder, but we know people murder, but
mm,
yeah,
but there is a common understanding of society that this should not happen.
yeah,
Obviously, the elites, what is happening amongst the elites and what is happening amongst maybe common folk is two totally different things. And like most laws, I sort of lean on with you on the idea that it's not happening. We can see these laws aren't being followed, but then again, it's I think it's human nature. But the laws never really apply the same way that they apply to the
yeah,
general mass public,
yeah,
to
yeah.
our elites. But we
I,
only get a
I,
snapshot of the elites in our
yeah.
surviving manuscripts. So
Yeah,
Mm,
because I think any law, if you look at any law in history, points to a problem. And
hmm
what I
mm,
find interesting, because it's one of the laws that we actually have a very good date for, the law of the innocent. I can't remember what it's called in Irish or Latin, where
mm,
basically a whole pile of clergy got together and they came
yeah.
up with this law, which many people see as one of the first human rights laws in the world,
hmm
which basically said, look, lads, if you're off burning churches, if you're off cattle raiding, if you're off killing each other, leave the women alone, leave the kids alone, leave the civilians alone. Um, which, as a law, is great, but it also points to the fact that there was a problem with this. There were
hmm
Mm,
people killing innocents. And I think this would have been in the ninth century that the law, whichever law had existed before, was not working. So
yeah.
therefore, that's why the clergy got together and they produced this law, which
Mm,
probably had some effect, as in people were all, like off cattle raiding. So, yeah, we better not burn down that little village there, leave those poor people alone. Maybe it worked for a year or two. And then,
yeah. Well, you hit the nail on the head there because it depends on the era. Because the Law of the Innocents definitely got chucked. Because the Law of the Innocent comes out around the 8th century, if I'm not mistaken,
yeah.
yeah.
and it's chucked in
Some
the bin.
someone,
But
sorry, someone
yeah,
has thrown in the name Con Adamon. Thanks.
Con over that.
I don't know how to pronounce
Um,
456. And thanks, Tom, Law of the Innocents. Yeah.
uh,
Go ahead. Sorry.
but the thing is that the Law of the Innocents comes out in the 8th century, but that thing's chucked in the bin by the time you get into the 9th century because we have the fighting that's happening in Ireland in the early 9th century, where you have them fighting over trying to impose the law of St. Patrick, where they're trying to centralize around Armagh to a certain degree. And then you have the law of St. Columba, where they're trying to keep the island, the monastic settlements decentralized. And it causes massive violence in Ireland, where they're actually just burning churches on both sides. And women are being kidnapped and brought to Dublin. So that law definitely got chucked in the bin in the 9th century. But then when you go into the 10th century, all those laws can be reinforced again because you have full-on proper protection rackets kicking off between the Enale under Donegal Dunn and between Dublin as well. So it depends what era you're talking about that you have. Sometimes society can be, a complete and utter mess that we can see in the 9th century where, laws of the innocents and all that type of being chucked in the bin. And it is more like reading Nile Saga, where it is blood feud on blood feud. But then you go into the 10th century, where society's gone back onto its feet again, and you have protection rackets that can be enforced, and then you can bring in all these civilized laws again. So it's definitely a case of sometimes it's society can be like a roller coaster, where sometimes it can be very good and we can enforce law, and then other times it's complete and utter garbage.
Yeah, and then it also would have varied between lordships. So if you had a powerful lord or overlord who could enforce his will, probably that lordship would have been more peaceful because he wouldn't have tolerated people going around burning down churches or murdering. Because there was always in Gaelic Ireland the idea of a social contract. So you give money, or you give your labor, or you become a soldier for your lord, but he has to protect you. And so in the 16th century, protect you against attacks of the English or whatever. But in the 9th century, in the 8th century, that obviously meant you can go and farm, you can go and be a blacksmith, you can do your daily work without fear of getting murdered or without fear of your property getting robbed.
Just a quick question there for you, Owen O'Neill. What's your field of expertise? What did you get your doctorate in? Just Jim O'Neill, just quickly acquiring on that one.
He's also asking about the background. My doctorate it's basically on the 9 Years' War and the formation of the Irish state. And then Jim is also asking about the background in the picture. That is Dublin. A photograph of Dublin from the 9th century, one of the few photographs. It's actually a model of Viking Dublin in the National Museum of Ireland. I took a photograph. And since we're supposed to be discussing the Battle of Clontarf, I decided it was appropriate. It was an appropriate photo.
Yeah, some of the paintings and stuff online are complete garbage when it comes down to depicting the Battle of Clontarf. There's one that's quite famous online, and I can't think it's complete garbage because it shows a Brian Brew that looks like he's taken from the 15th century, well, a really, really bad 15th century, because he's got riveted mail, which is kind of garbage because everybody was switching to play. It's kind of garbage because if you look at Ridra of the 15th century, they have plate on, and the Gallo glass would be the ones using what was called riveted mail and stuff. But the problem is then he's got a claymore on top of that, but it's more of a Scottish claymore rather than an Irish claymore, because the Irish claymore, Cleve Moore, would actually have a ring pommel on it. So he's looking slightly 15th century and yet still more Scottish 15th century, sorry.
But you find that if you go to a museum with loads of Renaissance paintings, and then there's always going to be paintings to do with Jesus or Roman time. And they're all painted in 15th century armor. Yeah, sort of, here's Jesus and here's the soldiers coming to arrest them, and they're all complete plate mail. Or the Battle of the Summer, I think it was one of Alexander the Great's battle, and it's a medieval sort of no historical accuracy. That only starts coming much later. Someone
Yeah,
was
that goes
asking,
back to go on.
go ahead. I was going to answer a question.
Oh no, answer the question first because we'll
Yeah.
get back onto topic
Dennis
because
was asking, Dennis McCarthy was asking, was the Butler v. Desmond a blood feud? I would.
That's
It's at
interesting.
21. It's at 21-11. I would say it wasn't a blood feud. It
Yeah.
was a long-going political rivalry, which spilled over. Because it happens, there's loads of fights over 300-400 years, but it's not that every Butler is out to kill every Desmond. There's a difference.
Well, they're so intermarried they'd end up having to kill each other, kill themselves.
Yeah.
This is for my granddad.
Yeah, because during the 100 Years' War, the Butlers and the Fitzgeralds got on really well. It was, what's his name? James the Usurper Fitzgerald. And they're both called James, by the way. It's just I call the other one by his Irish name. Because in the annals, he's referred to as Seamus. And that's Seamus, the White Earl Butler. But what was it called? The translation from Seamus is actually James. But I call the Butler one Seamus just so when I'm actually discussing them, there's no tripping over. So Seamus the White Earl Butler and James the Usurper Fitzgerald were actually buddy. They were buddy for years until Seamus jumped into bed with the English, and James felt it as a full betrayal, and then that leads into the Wars of the Roses. But for years and years and years, the Fitzgeralds got on really well and ran the administration of Ireland super good. They brought in some amazing trade rights with the Iberian Peninsula and with Florentine. And that's the point where, if you actually read it in the book you have advised as well on the Fitzgeralds, God, I don't actually have it on me right now. It's another book that's in some pile. Oh, there it is, actually. The Geraldines in Medieval Ireland. Absolutely fantastic book, but it points out the moment where, and you probably know this one as well, Owen, when James the Usurper Fitzgerald declares that he's a Florentine to the Irish Parliament. Ultimately, it was to get trade rights. They got trade rights with the Florentines, and the Florentines were connected to this family. He connected himself to a woman that's in the Mona Lisa. When I'm describing this, what was it? Rachel always has to correct me on my Italian, but what was it called? I think it's absolutely hilarious that you had the Geraldines declaring themselves Florentine from the 15th century onwards. They kind of forgot they were Florentines in the 16th century, didn't they? Or did they still run around? Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
The myth was no longer important, and in the 16th century, the Reformation kicks in. So the English are more concerned with being descendants of the Romans and Trojans than they are with being descendants of Catholic Italian nobles.
But yeah, absolutely brilliant stuff nonetheless. We'll pop on back over to Viking Dublin. Yeah, the whole idea of protection racket and stuff is very, very interesting. Of course, on the 23rd, on Thursday, last Thursday past, we had the anniversary on the Battle of Clontarf, when and you kind of have a large myth about this, where for years, from the 19th century onwards, well, I say 19th century, but the myth kind of fosters itself back in the 12th century by the O'Briens, when they kind of do an old rewriting of history with the book of the Wars of the Irish and the Foreigners, which was written in the 12th century, that starts to give this idea. And it definitely gets heightened in the 19th century, where you have this idea of Norway versus Ireland, the Irish versus the Norse. And of course, that's all all made up. It's all mythicized. It's a big, massive myth. The actual war itself in the what was it called? The late 10th century, the early 11th century, that was fought in 1014, was actually a rebellion. Brian Brew had declared himself Emperor of the Scots, as seen in the Book of Armagh. And in it, Leinster and Dublin, and even eventually the Kenloan, and even indication from Mael Shocknell and Clan Coleman, weren't the biggest fans of Brian Boru being Emperor of the Scots in Ireland. And so at least the men of Leinster and the men of Dublin actually rebelled around, what was it, 1013. They had rebelled, and Brian Boru did plan originally to march up to Dublin and siege Dublin, but he in fact didn't have the resources to siege them throughout winter. So he decided to march back over to around Clare and Cashel, wait until April, very, very early in April, raise up his military force, and then march back up to Dublin again just before the start of cattle raiding season. And it was here on the 23rd that the forces from the Isles came down to Dublin to reinforce the men of Leinster and Dublin. And it's from there that we had the Battle of Clontarf. Any thoughts or opinions? Oh, and just before the show went live, you had a major opinion about the Battle of Clontarf. Would you like to share it with the comment section there? Because I think the comment section will definitely find it interesting. Like
the real one, or the funny one?
Both of them. I want to hear. I want the comment section to be hearing about both of them. Go on there.
I was just saying, mimicking. There was a lady on TikTok or something a couple of years ago who said that the Roman Empire didn't exist. So I was saying that the Battle of Clontarf didn't occur.
Well, to be fair, it's a decent argument to make. Better than Rome, anyway.
No,
go on.
Where did it occur? Like, was it Clontarf? Probably. Was it where, like, because I've walked the so-called battlefield, it's all under houses. Was it there? Possibly. It's very hard to place most battlefields. But my serious thing is who won the battle. Like the traditional picture, which is a 19th century creation. Well, sorry, no. First of all, it's a creation of the book of the War of the Gael versus the Gaul, which by Brian Boru was it grandson or great grandson?
It's his great grandson. Was it Murdoch Ibrahim?
Yeah, this massive victory of the Irish against the foreigners, which isn't true because it's most battles in history. The result is not clear cut. The result of the Battle of Clontarf is not clear cut. The guy who rebelled, the King of Leinster, gets killed. But Silkenbeard, who very wisely decides not to go to the battle, he stays in Dublin. He's fine. He remains the king in Dublin. Brian gets killed. His son, his heir, gets killed. The O'Briens, or the O'Briens to be, the Dalcash, is better to say, they lose the high kingship, which they have usurped. And Mael Shockland becomes king again.
Yes, he does.
The actual winners of the battle are Mael Shockland and Silkenbeard. The main loser is the actual high kingship, because for a long time, the word King of Tara is better than high kingship, but the overlord of Ireland as such was sewn up by the northern and southern Inel, and it worked fairly well. All of a sudden, that system is destroyed by Brian Boru. He dies and leaves instability. So for the next almost 2 centuries, there's so much instability. There's no dynasty manages to get control of the high kingships. Some come close, but they always lose out. And this results in the Normans being invited in which has a very unforeseen turn of events.
Mm.
So there is this nationalist thing. Oh, the Irish against the Vikings. That wasn't the battle, and you could actually
Yeah.
say that the outcome of the battle was the Norman incursion into Ireland.
Mm-mm-mm. That's very, 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 very interesting because we were talking about successful protection rackets just early on. I was saying about it, and I'd love to get your opinion on that because under Donegal, it's definitely that Ireland is in a much more secure situation, and I know Claire Downham. And I want to get back on top of her reading and stuff, but she was making an argument that Ireland in the 10th century goes into an economic golden age. I'd love to get more into that one and look into more of the archaeological finds and see if the archaeological finds definitely reflect that because we definitely get a keyhole look into archaeological wise into some form of golden age that's there in the 10th century. And it wouldn't surprise me given one, especially when Donegal Dunn marches back into Dublin, granted, you guys can turn around and say that, well, it's funny because, what was it called? The Ever, especially under Citric Ever, goes over and kills Niall Glundov. It's around in 919. Dublin successfully rebels actually 100 years before the Battle of Clontarf in 919 under Ragnar E. Emer and Citric E. Emer. And Niall Glundov marches down to Dublin where they have the Battle of Isle Bridge. And in the Battle of Isle Bridge, Citric E. Emer successfully kills not just the Over King of Ireland at the time, Niall Glundov, a member of the Kennel Owen, but he also successfully kills dozens of kings in Ireland at the time, the Ree of Ireland. And so it ends up leaving the path for Donegal Dunn. But once Donegal Dunn gets back on his feet again by going around and collecting the cattle tribute of Ireland, he very quickly marches into Dublin and violently smashes Dublin at the time, ran by Olaf, what was that, Umlev the third, goes in, smashes Dublin, takes cattle tribute from Dublin. But from my opinion, it's at that point onwards that a successful protection racket is ran by both the Ever and then the Ever under the Enel have this massive protection racket on that brings massive stability, in my opinion, into Ireland. And then from that point up to Brian Boru, the Enel seem to be running a very, very good protection racket until Brian Boru takes over and then just smashes around them. Like a lot of people see Donegal Dunn as an evil force in Ireland, but as evil as he was, and don't get me wrong, he was a wee bit of a sadist, especially to poor Brian Boru's sister, who he actually had hung for saying that she wasn't loyal in the marriage. But Donegal Dunn still, in my opinion, brought stability to the island. And then you suddenly have this, you talk about Leinster and Dublin rebelling. But in fact, Brian Boru himself was a rebel to literally the roof of Ireland because the Enel dynasty had been, the ruling class in Ireland all the way back to the 5th century. And Brian Boru had broken that lineage. I remember Maynooth University was highlighting that on the podcast, Medieval Irish podcast, where they highlight the fact that the Dal Cash, led by Brian Boru, had smashed the Enel dynasty, and with that they had broken the protection racket that they were running for generations. So did Brian Boru bring in stability, ill stability into Ireland? And you definitely do get in that indication. And even the stability that the O'Briens bring in after the death of Brian Boru, that still left the island very much divided, where you have a southern part of Ireland which does, to a certain degree, but get back on its feet again. But the northern part of Ireland was definitely left unstable, and it's that instability that eventually, as you said there, reinvites the Normans into Ireland. So I
No,
definitely do see those cracks there. Go on.
Northern part. I
Why?
don't think. No, anyway, I'll get out. There's a few
Well,
things I want to. Hang on, I want to dissect this first thing because we'll end up missing past this, and because it ties in with what Owen was saying about Brian Brudan. Davey said, I hear a few different stories on how the old High King died. He actually put up a fight, and even old but was skilled, or he just died praying in front of a cross. Which do you think was real? Actually, the dying in front of a cross or dying while praying comes from a 14th century German manuscript, and it's probably not true. It was probably just embellished to romanticize and sort of, reinvigorate that link between the hero and the church, and sort of just try and link those two things together. His faith, they often try in medieval manuscripts. It's your piety is linked to your character. So if he's a good Christian soldier, he's a good person. So that's probably not true. As for fighting, we honestly we have no idea. I mean, considering the most of the information we have is older than the actual. There's no contemporary evidence surviving, but what does survive is told that obviously Broder and the fleeing Viking forces end up going through his camp and they kill Brian's bodyguards. Now I imagine Brian's bodyguards are younger, fitter than he is, and if they're able to just get through them, Brian probably isn't much of a contest, for them. I think what they ran into was a frail old man in his tent. Whether he picked up his letter knife to go for them, I don't know. But I think in all reality, what we know is they stormed through a camp, killed young, fit soldiers, heavily armed vanguard soldiers, and happened across an old man in his tent. So it doesn't leave much to the imagination, in my opinion. But an old man, and not only an old man in our times, and he'd be an old man even in our days. Imagine back then. And a man who's just campaigned, just had to do a very weary travel. Anyone who's watched any of the histories about Edward's travels up to Scotland, when you age, traveling, campaigning across medieval countries would have been very tiring, even for a king who would have all the luxuries to have. Yeah. So that would be my first point. Second point, we were sort of talking about the instability that Brian sort of created. At the time, I kind of think that he created it. He was on his way to putting the building blocks to a very good and stable European kingdom.
Yes.
Time. We can see that from the later sort of manuscripts that survive about the kingdoms that came to join him when he went and fought at the Battle of Clontarf. And you have kingdoms from basically every province. All 4 or 5 provinces turn up some contingents of troops and kings to support Brian in his efforts. But you've got, apart from Northern Leinster, Northern Ulster, and possibly Meath, depending on which tradition you want to go by. But
what Mel Scotland was doing on the day of the battle.
Yeah, and the same with the O'Rourke's the Connacht contingent of the O'Rourke's. They may or may not have turned up. They probably turned up, but whether they actually participated again, or left the night before, again, it comes down to later. We've got later political messaging coming back, and it's just who you believe is really all we can really put to that. But I think he was very good for Ireland at the time, but I feel what he created was maybe a bit ahead of its time for Ireland, and the rest of the island wasn't quite ready for it.
Just in relation to that, I did a video a couple of years ago about the Battle of Island Bridge when Neil Grundle was killed. And in the
Yeah.
research for that, I read an interesting article. Is Bart Jasky, The Vikings and the Kingship of Tara. And he argues
Yeah.
that you have a succession of kings. Niall Glundum is one, Flancilla is another. I think Donegal Dunn is there as well.
Yeah.
And you have these guys, and they are all making the High Kingship, the Kingship of Tara, more powerful. But
Yes.
ultimately, they fail in
Okay.
Niall Glundum's. For Niall Glundum, he fails. He actually gets killed in that in a
Yes.
battle. It's probably one of the most important in Irish history, and we know damn well. So if he'd won that battle, he could well have been the Brian Boru of his day.
100%. Yeah.
But it's the one who, but the Vikings interrupt and kill him. They also kill, is it his son or his grandson, Muirhartig of the Leather Cloaks, who again is a very, he's becoming a very powerful lord. He's even, according to the annals, he gets on a boat and raids or goes with ships and attacks, is it Iceland or somewhere like that? But he gets killed. So you have all these attempts to get a more powerful High Kingship. They fail. Brian Boru succeeds he becomes one. He manages to exert his power over all of Ireland, although over the Kenaloan and perhaps Kenalconnell, very tentatively. Why does Brian succeed? He succeeds because he has a large amount of Norse in his army, and who are able to use the River Shannon as a military tool. Several years ago, there was a very interesting podcast. I think they call it Head School by History Ireland, and one of the academics in that makes an argument, which I've seen written down, saying that Brian Boru wins the High Kingship because the Northern Nail defeat the Norse. So there's a series of battles in the 8th, 9th century where the Norse are effectively driven out of most of Ulster. So you don't have cities, you don't have a Waterford, you don't have a Limerick, you don't have a Dublin emerging there. Whereas Brian Boru has Limerick, and perhaps his best victory is his conquest, his winning over of the Limerick Vikings. So their men and their ships give him this tool which the others aren't able to fight back against. And then just another point, the real winner of the Battle of Clontarf was the city of Dublin. It was an important city before. It was a major source of wealth being fought over, but it's not the capital. But when the Normans come in, and when Henry II comes in, 1169, 1171, it becomes the capital. So in the 200 years between Clontarf and less than 200 and the Norman invasion, Dublin goes from strength to strength.
It does.
The central point to capture. It goes from economic strength to strength. Politically, it varies. It goes all over the place, as it always is.
Well, that's what I was going to say to you. When that Dublin was the real winner, I was like, I mean, they kind of get used as like, that we need to take that for our cash cow now. Every king sort of buys that up. Like that's so the citizens of Dublin don't do too well for the next 200 years.
Dublin,
well, it depends who you are.
Dublin become like Tara. The High King was Tara. But suddenly,
100%,
the place to capture. And once the Normans capture Dublin, and once Rory O'Connor made a beat mess of his siege of Dublin, that's like the Normans are in, and the Normans are able to create their lordship in Ireland.
Oh yeah, because what happens is the moment after the Battle of Clontarf, from the get-go, Sihtric Silkenbeard goes for a pilgrimage over to Rome, the papacy. And straight away, the very first thing he does is try to pull Dublin away from Armagh. And he's trying to connect it over to Canterbury, over to England. And I remember sitting down and having a private conversation with at the time he was Dr. What's his name? Oh my God, my brain is trying to wake up. Dr. Damien Bracken. And I remember we were having a conversation about the reform of the church in Ireland. And Sihtric Silkenbeard was well ahead of the times. And I remember myself and Rachel from the Creative Contessa have very deep conversations about this. And we talk about the development of insular Christianity in Ireland at the very start of the early medieval period, when you have the collapse of the administration of the Roman Empire. And basically what happens is that in many regions of Europe, they start to develop their own Christian ideas. But then you have Sihtric Silkenbeard in Dublin, who straight away from the get-go is trying to connect Christchurch in Dublin with the papacy and the papacy's ideas of how Christianity should be. And for Sihtric Silkenbeard, because he's politically motivated to be independent from Armagh, it's a case of yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full. Where the problem is with the likes of Armagh and various other spots in Ireland is it's like, oh yeah, those are great ideas, but I think we do it slightly better in Ireland. And this frustrates the papacy from my interpretation. You guys might have your own interpretation about that. When it comes down to the reform of the church and everything that happens after Clontarf. But Dublin seems to be just on perfect page with what's happening with the papacy at the time, which allows them to start turning away from Armagh and be independent to themselves. Now, still going under the administration of Canterbury in England, which causes massive political problems later on with the arrival of the Normans. But the fact that Dublin is starting to reform and start to develop, and even under Sihtric Silkenbeard starts to bring in coinage, which, a lot of people would turn around and say, oh, that goes back to the Roman Empire and stuff. And yeah, sure it does, but it's very well forward. When you look at the rest of the Scandinavian world, which looks very much to silver and still putting in, you have your weighing scales, you put silver on it, you're starting to weigh things up. Dublin at the time bringing in coinage is very much ahead of the game. So not only is Sihtric thinking ahead of the rest of Europe when keeping in line with the Roman Christian Church and their reform and stuff, but they're also bringing in coinage which is ahead of the rest of the Scandinavian world. Granted, Europe at the time, under anyone who's under the old Charlemagne administration, already has coins, and so does England. But when it comes down to the rest of the Scandinavian world, Sihtric is constantly ticking ahead. And it's those movements that put the foundation to Dublin going ahead of the rest of Ireland. Now, granted, you have people who are clicking onto this, such as Murtagh Í Briain. Thank God for himself. His father, Turlough Í Briain, had put him in charge of the administration of Dublin when he was young. And he suddenly clicked, hey, wait, actually, there's a world outside of Dublin. We need to start modernising. Now, the problem with Murtagh Í Briain is the rest of Ireland doesn't see things like that, especially, from my opinion, and you guys can go against that, the O'Connors, when they're usurping Murtagh Í Briain, they don't think like that at all. Like, they don't centralise themselves around Dublin. There's an argument and debate, were they centralising themselves around Galway? I can't really see that, to be honest with you. There's an argument to be made there, especially with the arrival of Moat and Bailey castles. Were they centralising themselves like the way that the Normans were doing it? But we need to find more evidence of that. But Murtagh Í Briain definitely was trying to centralise himself around Dublin. But once again, that brings in the importance of Dublin. because of the fact that Citric Silkenbeard had put down that foundation from the reform of the church, which becomes very important, especially when we start to see crusades. And then the fact of economically, with the introduction of coinage and the way that he brings it into a cattle society. It's that foundation of being, your cattle is worth this much coins, is a system that gets used for the rest of the medieval period. So yeah, 100%, I definitely would agree. Dublin after the Battle of Clontarf becomes so important because of how important Citric and is just the way that Citric is like looking into the future and makes those plans for the future, and even builds the foundation of what Dublin becomes for the rest of the medieval period, from my interpretation.
So,
so go ahead, Michal.
No, if you're going on about Citric and Dublin, you go first, because I'm going to pull it back a thing.
I was going to say that Dublin was growing in importance before. Like, you could say Dublin. Why was Niall Glundubh killed in Islandbridge? Because of Dublin. It was growing importance.
Yeah.
Why did Dublin become more important than, say, Waterford or Limerick? Okay, it has an obvious advantage over Limerick. Yeah. It's nearer to England, it's nearer to France, etc. But why over Waterford? It suddenly shoots up. And then, just in relation to the church, you have to be a wee bit discussing the church is a bit complicated, because the Irish church grew in a very different way from most of the rest of Europe. So definitely from Europe that had been Roman, in that Rome left an urban mark on Western Europe, on the Middle East, on parts of Africa. Ireland was non-urban. So the church grows. It grows with monasteries, like monastic places, pilgrimages. Parishes and dioceses come much later. The way that grew in Ireland was very similar to the political pattern of Ireland. It was decentralized place. That meant bishops could have prestige, but they didn't have much power. That meant there was no money going to Rome. That meant medieval history is, if you look at medieval history, the amount of fights between the papacy and important kings and lords, especially from what would become the Holy Roman Empire. There's loads of them. So the papacy would always want some sort of reform in the Irish church so they can have more control. There was a fight between Armagh, between Kildare. Dublin itself doesn't fit into this model, because I don't know when the first Archbishop of Dublin emerges, because the main church centre, one in Kildare, and you have Glendalough. And then I think it's after Clontarf when it becomes the Diocese of Dublin and Glendalough. So at the time of the Norman, when the Normans come, Lawrence O'Toole, he's the bishop or Archbishop of Dublin, but also of Glendalough. Yes. He's related to the two. But from then on, in religious terms, Glendalough declines, Dublin grows.
Yeah, I mean, my sort of 2 cents on this is that, with the questions, sort of why does Dublin sort of grow and sort of become this the central focus instead of something like Waterford, and obviously you've covered the churches. When you look at the kingship of Dublin, like Waterford kind of actually lacks a king for the better part of the 10th century, because the Eamor, who are connected, Dublin's connection to York, It has that intrinsic link to York.
Yeah.
I think, you know, in Northern England, you know, so there's like this, there's almost like this like cross sea empire it's focused between
Yes.
these 2 points. So, and Waterford is not really as involved in it. It's more of a, actually for a lot of its like early years, it's more of just a market town than what Dublin is. So I think that economic supremacy and, like you said already, touched on the urbanization, the lack of leadership, like a solid kingship, the way that Dublin had with the Emer. I think that's what leads up to it. I think it's a multitude of things leading in the same direction. And if one of those pillars are to fall, the whole thing falls. And I think, you know, Dublin just managed to, very luckily, I suppose, like any city, empire, etc., just had all the right things at the right time. So that would be sort of my sort of. I do want to just quickly touch on Bernie Brosnan's in the chat, so I want to say hi to one of the Clans and Dynasties and Irish Medieval Histories friends. And I want to just quickly just throw back to an earlier part of the conversation about like Brian Boru and how things were leading up to his Clontarf and how he left Ireland after his death. This one's an interesting one. His son, for anyone that's not aware, his son Muirked MacBreen was killed in the battle of his natural heir and successor, killed in the Battle of Clontarf, charging at the Vikings with 2 flaming swords, and you know, famous thing. But and although Bernie says some really smart things in the chat, like Mihul's bringing sense to this Boru bashing. And this one I don't agree with, mainly because, no, I just want to say mainly because I kind of feel that actually a lot of what we know about him is pro Dalkash propaganda. I think it's like he's a common sort of like heroic archetype. You know, he's sort of like the Achilles of the Dalkash. You know, he's and he's so his story is sort of elevated. It's sort of fluffed out. You know, and really, I think that he would have been no different to any of his brothers. Really, it's just, I think it's just maneuvered like that in later writings. I think for let me get that question back up. For it to be a lot different, for the right outcome, the only way for a right outcome is if Brian had survived. It's the only way. I don't think, even if Mirka had not died, as a.
I
go on now.
Disagree with you slightly. In that Brian was a one-off, very talented, makes brilliant use of what he has. He used the high kingship, he smashes the nail, but he's old. I think like he's 80.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have
70 or 73, is he not? Sorry.
Yeah, okay. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's old. Like, I don't know the exact details.
He's an old man anyway, that's the main thing.
Yeah. He's older than me. Problem faced was the problem that was inherent in Gaelic political structure until its destruction in 1603. Succession. So from the sources, it looks like it was his successor. However, there's Brian and Mirka getting killed is a political disaster because, like, Alfred the Great was like the 3rd or 4th son, like, so he's a nobody, and all his brothers get killed. Yeah, Brian himself, a lot of his brothers get killed. So there is no clear line of succession. this is the problem, because those two of the survivors fight with each other. On Brian's death, whether it had been Clontarf, whether it had been 10 years later, if he hadn't died, the succession would have been difficult, because he had won everything on the battlefield and by imposing himself. He was making attempts to establish a dynasty, to establish a state, like, a household power. But this is, you can find it out for, like, Genghis Khan. When he dies, the Mongols kind of go, they turn in on themselves and they start fighting. Succession is difficult. And when you have someone who comes out of nowhere, achieves something, what they need to do is establish a clear rule of succession. And in Gaelic Ireland, this was very, very difficult. It had good things. It left the Gaelic society much more dynamic, but it also caused numerous feuds. We started off talking about brother fighting brother, cousin fighting cousin. So the Dalcash, instead of focusing on consolidating what Brian had achieved, they kind of turn each other, and Mill Shocklin says, "Okay, I'm High King again."
Yeah, but that's the point I was trying to raise, that if Mercer had been the only survivor and Brian had died and Mercer had survived, we still would have probably had the same succession crisis that we already did have. He had other brothers, he had uncles, he had kinsmen and factions within his. The only unifying force at that time was Brian. And so him surviving is the only option for something, a new future, a different future that didn't involve what actually did happen in fighting between the Dalcash, the complete disintegration of the High Kingship within the Dalcash, and Emil something together. While Brian lives, he's the anchor or the glue that holds us all together. So, and maybe I'm being a bit romantic in saying that because you said it didn't matter if he lived another 10 years, that I'm saying, well, if he'd lived another year or two, giving him time to consolidate better behind Murkad, maybe it would have been different. I get that. That's probably just the romantic in me, that maybe, and giving Brian a bit more credit than he's maybe due, and the Irish Kings and other rival factions not thinking that they actually are the bastards they actually are. But I think that I just stand by that the only way for it, like if Brian is the only one that links them together, so therefore the minute he's gone, it doesn't matter who's still alive. It doesn't matter, because it immediately fragments.
But
I don't think. Sorry, there. Go on.
Say that both Brian and Erica survived. What would have happened? Like, Brian would have had to rule, but dealing with sub-kingdoms that wanted to rebel or wanted to get loose of his overlordship all the time. Whether Kennel Owen, whether the McCartys, not sure if they were McCartys with the Leona, whether Leinster, whether Dublin, he would have faced the difficulty of imposing a centralized law, a centralized kingdom on what was a politically decentralized and very dynamic and fragmented political system.
In my interpretation, I don't think if Brian Bruce's main heir hadn't of been killed in the Battle of Clontarf, I don't think the southern part of Ireland would have collapsed the way it did after the Battle of Clontarf, because, and I say this because Donegal Mac Breen, when he takes over, he's very quick to take over and re-centralize the southern part of Ireland again. When I say centralized, as in taking over the control of the south again, we're talking about Brian Brew dies, and then the South never starts to go back under any form of unified administration again, which isn't kind of true. What was it called? Donegal Mac Breen eventually does take over the administration of the southern part of Ireland and becomes some form of over king again afterwards. However, it can be very debated if he would have been, if they, the Dalcash, would have been able to push their administration up to the north of Ireland and reinforce it against the likes of, especially against the likes of the Kenal Owen. The Kenal Owen seemed to be, and Bertie could easily debate against this as well. The Kenal Owen seemed to be very dedicated to refuse to give any form of cattle tribute to the Dalcash. Even if Brian Brew was successful on, setting up administration after his death, I still see the Kenal Owen, once again, rebelling, because, and this is what I was going to say about the North, and my main point with the invitation of the Normans into Ireland is, granted, it is Deirbhid MacMora, the King of Leinster, that does invite the Normans in, but he's inviting them in from a reaction from civil fighting in Ireland between the MacLucklans, the men of the North, the successors of the Kenal Owen, against the O'Connors. And the O'Connors at the time had fixed the administration in the south of Ireland. Like, the O'Connors at the time are trying to push to become the Rí Éireann, the kings of Ireland, recognised by the papacy. And the thorn in their side at that time, going into the 1180s, is the MacLucklans up in the north of Ireland, who had become the successors of this resistance from the Kenal Owens from the south of Ireland. And the whole debate ultimately is, if Brian Brew was successful at the Battle of Clontarf and then had remarched up in the north and then once again forced his administration to the Kenal Owen, would we be in a position going into the High Middle Ages of a much more centralised Ireland, especially with those adjustments from the Gregorian reforms and the usage of motte and bailey castles, the way that the Normans were doing at the time to centralise the island of Ireland? That I think that's such an interesting debate to have. I don't think if Brian Brew's main heir had been killed at the Battle of Clontarf, as Bertie is saying there, I do actually agree with Bertie. I don't think Ireland would have been centralised after the Battle of Clontarf. I think there would have been definitely still problems in the north, but I don't think the south would have had the same problems if Brian Brew's main heir had succeeded, as in not being killed.
Okay, so I when it comes to Ulster and that's the whole thing. This is why I focus on Brian, because I don't think Bertie could have united Ulster. Brian's only problem in the north is the Neil. He's got the Fermanagh on his side. He's got the Ullid on his side. He's got the Airchella on his side. Three of the other three biggest kingdoms in the north, right? And the Neil have just spent the last 2 centuries aggressively expanding against these three kingdoms. Brian has them on his side. If the Neil tried to do anything, which they probably would, Flaherty would have probably, but he'd done it 3 times before. Common sense says he's going to do it again. But now these three kingdoms have fought with Brian effectively at the Battle of Clontarf. They fought beside him. So I think Brian's already proven he owns more of the north than Flaherty. So I think that is the thing that kind of makes me lean this way. That only Brian is the solidifying factor and the only person who can push it forward. I don't think, like you say, I'm not specifically talking about Munster. I'm talking in an All Ireland sense, and that's just why I kind of lean that way. But I guess we'll never know.
Yeah, it does go to that thing. Go on there, Rod.
One thing there is, if you look at it from a historical sociology point of view, if you were king in the South, a southern-based king like Limerick, Clare, as Brian was, or if you were a king of the Kenaloan or Kenalconnell, your greatest opponents are going to be those furthest away from you, because there's a limit on your power. Sort of your power will ultimately rest on your military power. So for Brian to getting into Armagh is relatively easy. Getting up to Inishowen, getting up to Derry, parts of Tyrone is much more complicated. And you might walk in there and say, "Here's a few cows. We agree you're king." But as soon as you leave, they're sticking their tongue out at you. And if you look at Irish history, the Owenach they disobeyed the Nail never had much power over the Owenach. In part because the Leinster guys were in the way. And on the River Shannon, etc. So, and in part because they were just too bloody far. Like, you can do a raid down there, burn a few things, and then get a few monks to big it up in an anno. But to actually
that always comes from me.
Yeah, to actually control it, to go from Cashel to Ailach up outside Derry is a long way. Try and walk it. It's a long way, and it presents a serious problem. One of the reasons for the rise of Dublin is its actual position. It's north of Leinster, almost right in the middle of Leinster now. Then it's sort of north of Leinster, and it's near Meath, and it's south of Ulster, and so it's kind of an in-between place where everybody can reach. It can get money from everybody, it can get slaves from everybody, etc. So it's in a very useful thing. But Ailach or Donegal, Tyrconnell, Tyrone, they're bloody far away.
Yeah. Just popping back into the comment section, lads. Some of you the questions are popping up are absolutely brilliant, and I do apologize if we're just slipping past it. There was a comment that Dennis had made a good half an hour ago, and I just thought it was a good and interesting comment, and that was on the importance of Dublin. And I actually fully agree with what Dennis was saying there, and that was the slave trade in Dublin. 100%. I do think Dublin starts to decline in 1103 when Murtagh Ibrahim, brings in. It was the papacy. The papacy was pressuring Dublin to get rid of the slave trade. So I definitely do agree. You have to slide me up to the top.
Yeah, that's what
first. Yeah. And one more time, I have to slide just up on the top. And Dario. And Murtagh Ibrahim in 1103, he bans slavery in Dublin. It really affects the economy. And even after that, you can't turn around and say that there's a clean cut, slavery is gone from Dublin. Because you still have, a few Vikings here and there still imposing slavery. In fact, we still see indications of slavery all the way up to the 100 Years' War, where we have Kerns kidnapping French women. But regardless, it definitely, after 1103, there is a hit to the economy, and you can actually see the coins in Dublin becoming very much affected. They're not as good as they were when Sitrick Silkenbeard was in charge of Dublin. back in 1030. In 1030, you see the peak of coinage in Dublin, but that's also when you see the peak of slavery in Dublin. So, I was boasting how great the relationship was at the time between the papacy and Dublin in 1030 after the Battle of Clontarf. But on the flip side, Citric Silkenbeard was making insane, vast amount of money out of slavery. If we go into the Icelandic saga literally refers to Dublin as the capital of the world. It sees Dublin as the capital of the world, the New York of the time, because of the fact that slavery was so big in Dublin at the time. Slaves were being brought all over the world. Well, it's very debatable if they were being brought over the world, because we haven't seen any solid evidence of Chinese slaves. But the fact that we can entertain the conversation of Chinese slaves being brought from Beijing all the way over to Dublin and its connections into the Silk Road highlights the fact that Dublin at the time was vastly important, and it was vastly important because of the amount of slaves going into Dublin. People are constantly very quick to turn around and highlight the fact that women were being stolen all over, from all over Ireland and being sold in Dublin. And it highlights the fact of the dominance of Viking trade at the time, and I find that very debatable because of the fact of how many Leinster men were marrying into Dublin. But at the same time, once again, because of the fact that we're entertaining this conversation, does highlight the importance of Dublin at the time and why Dublin was so important going into the likes of the Battle of Isle Bridge, going into the Battle of Tara, going into the Battle of Dublin. If it's any other settlement in Ireland, both from the Gaels side and the Gaels side, the native Irish side, or the Gaul Gael, the Hiberno-Scandinavians, if the settlement is attacked, what you find most of the time is that people just retreat out of the settlement. They don't turn it into a large-scale siege or battle. It's just easier just to get your men away, wait for them to leave, and then go back into the settlement again. But the fact that people are putting their foot down and saying, no, I am holding on to this settlement, and both sides eventually agree to do battle, highlights the vastly important, why Dublin is so and is really, really important at the time. The fact that they're not retreating like you see in Limerick or in, Waterford, shows why Dublin is so important at the time.
Yeah, I think, as Caveman says, it was the Normans officially end slavery, because in England, one of the first things they do when they abolish slavery, the Saxons had it, despite the fact that they were Christian. I think the Normans did the same in Dublin. Probably the slave trade was declining. It probably once slavery is abolished in England, probably it had a major impact on the slave trade in Ireland. It reduced it drastically, because if England is gone, you've got to transport your slaves much further. And I don't know when slavery got banned in France, but it was probably before. So where would the last slavery have been? Maybe in Scandinavia, but that had a big thing on it. Someone said that the Berbers were catching slaves from Egypt and Ireland. I don't think so. There is one recorded slave raid on Baltimore in 1600 something. The first decade of the 17th century. That's the only attack, the only slave raid recorded.
And if you want to,
most of the people they took away were actually English.
That's exactly the point I was going to say. That's exactly.
They did us a favor, so.
The Berbers were not. They were a Mediterranean power. Their ships, is like in the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th centuries. Their ships were not crossing the Atlantic. Like if you look at the Spanish Armada and look at sailing in the 16th and 17th century, the amount of the Atlantic was very, very difficult
Mm.
to sail in.
I want to try something here. Just maybe
What have you
3 of
done?
us.
There is a certain level of raiding going on between the Iberian Peninsula over to Ireland. But you're right. Like anytime there is raiding, military forces are raised up in Dublin in the 10th century and then again in the 15th and 16th century. These things are well organized. Like you can't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to sail all the way over to Iberian Peninsula to commit a massive raid. These things are not just well organized, but because of the fact that we see large levels of boats going into doing these massive raids into the Iberian Peninsula and then vice versa from the Iberian Peninsula over to Ireland to commit any of these raids, show the fact that these things must have been rare. But even the fact that, the other side make a huge deal about this and scream Bloody Mary about it, once again highlights how rare these big, massive organized raids into from Ireland into the Iberian Peninsula and then vice versa from the Iberian Peninsula into Ireland, how rare they were at the time. But they did happen. You do have, especially in the 10th century, these well organized, massive armada of ships. But you said there, those ships being organized and then going into Ireland were also very, very dangerous. Like you have endless amount of ships just crashing off the coast of Ireland. Ireland to sail
And
around
then
was super dangerous.
from the 11th century onwards, the
Mm,
Reconquista, or whatever it's called nowadays, is
yeah,
well underway.
yeah.
Lisbon is captured in 1147.
Mm,
Um, so there's big, like, Iberia is concerned with itself. There's like the whatever you call them, the uh, the people who would become the Spanish and the Portuguese
mm.
are
Oh,
concerned with recapturing Spain and Portugal, and then with fighting each other. Castile and Portugal are fighting each
yeah.
other, and the last, I think Granada falls in 1492. So,
Mm,
and then, but like if you look at the history, there's huge fights going on inside. So there's not much raiding from Iberia from the 11th century on. From like, there's no Berbers coming over to Ireland. They're too far.
mm.
Like there's other dynamics going on, and then like
Yes.
you start having the galley fleets, like
Mm,
the fighting that's going on at both ends of the Mediterranean.
mm.
Crusaders, Normans, Byzantines, Arabs, Mamelukes. They're all like, they're not coming over here. We're irrelevant to them.
Well, we get involved with fighting between Britain and Ireland. Once the the Norman invasion of Ireland happens, the O'Neills do reform their own boats, but they're then committing piracy against the Normans and the English. The O'Neills are, and then
Yeah,
after
we're
the
not
what was
coming
it,
over
Brian
here.
O'Neill's
We're
revolt,
irrelevant to them.
we go into the
We get
Scottish War
involved
of
with fighting
Independence.
between Britain and Ireland.
What's going on there?
Sorry, I was seeing what the new screen looks like. I want just quickly. I want everyone to see what everyone's saying in chat, so they can all talk to each other without being in different chats.
Oh yeah,
And so it keeps the conversation moving. But I wanted to see what it looked like on my phone. I didn't realize my sound was still on, so ignore that. It's
yeah.
gone
No,
now.
that's grand. But what was it called? Then you go into the Scottish War of Independence and the Hundred Years' War. So you not only see piracy happening within the O'Neills committing piracy, but then you have the likes of Brittany in France committing massive level of piracy and stuff, but they're committing piracy against the English. So during the Viking Age, we do see well organized piracy happening between Ireland and the Iberian Peninsula, and once again, very, very rare. But then once you go into the High Middle Ages and you see the Norman invasion of Ireland, then you see piracy happening within Britain and Ireland, and then it slowly seeps into the Hundred Years' War, where you see piracy happening between Britain, Ireland, and France. And so it becomes more local, and it's not that local level of piracy isn't just happening in Iberian Peninsula and Britain, Ireland, and France, but you also see the same thing happening within the Scandinavian countries themselves, where you see them committing more internal piracy rather than large scale external piracy. Like the Viking Age, like I wouldn't say piracy is over, but the Viking Age, there's a reason why they say it's over after the Battle of Hastings. Um, you just don't see the massive scale of well organized piracy being committing after that. From my opinion, not I can't think of any well organized level of piracy being committed after the Viking Age, unless you guys can think of any.
I can think of one, but it's quite a bit after. In the 1640s.
But that goes back into the piracy again, though. Back into the age of piracy after the medieval period.
Yeah, there were a lot of supporters of the Confederation of Kenny based in Dunkirk, which was a Spanish city at the time.
Yeah.
And they were quite effective. They didn't use the word piracy. What's that word? When you have a letter from some lord or some king that allows you to be Irish, and there's a posh word for remember. But they were quite effective out of there. And the 16th century, the English were the big pirates. That's why they get drawn into the war with Spain, because they're off attacking the Spanish fleets and plundering, because they developed an effective warship in the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Whereas Spain only becomes an Atlantic power after 1580, when it gets Portugal, when Philip II becomes king of because the ports in the north of Spain, in Galicia, are so ports, whereas Lisbon is an amazing port, especially if you want to organize a fleet going to Ireland or organize an armada to attack England.
Yeah. I was thinking more of the High Middle Ages and the late medieval period. I can't think of any well organized pirate raids being committed, because at least when you go into the 17th century, that's going back into the pirate age again. So I would definitely agree that going back into the pirate age again, we then see well organized pirate raids being committed in a massive large scale. In fact, even bigger than what we saw in the Viking Age. Like you see people in England pushing over to the Caribbean to pull off large scale piracy in those regions against the Spanish. So I definitely would agree that going back into the 17th century and the William Knight and Jacobite Wars, you see insanely well organized piracy being committed from that point onwards, like crazy level organization being done there. But I just can't think of those kind of like piracy. Don't get me wrong, piracy is being committed, and you see the likes of Brittany in France committing well organized pirate raids, but it's more internal around France, Britain, and Ireland, rather than the big massive scale that you saw in the 10th century, and then again going into the age of piracy in the 17th century. I just can't think of any large-scale piracy being committed of that scale in the High Middle Ages around, 1014 up to around the 1300s. And then again from the 1300s up to 1450. I just can't think of anything. And even going into the Renaissance. Go on.
Would you even want to? If you the 1030s, the 13th, 14th century, the Irish Sea along the coast is mayhem between England and Scotland fighting over the Isle of Man, the MacDonalds. You know what? You would probably be, if you were a pirate going raiding somewhere, you would probably get there and just have everything but the kitchen sink thrown at you by everyone else
Yeah.
along the way. It's carnage. Actually, all that mayhem probably made the most peaceful time along that channel.
There was in that period in the Mediterranean, there was a huge amount of piracy, whether by Christians, whether Muslims. There's constant raiding. And I know in the siege of, is it not Crete? In the siege of Malta, I think one of the Ottoman commanders was a famous pirate, a pirate who had hundreds and hundreds of ships. And to jump away from piracy, Caveman at 2209 asks an interesting question. Do you think the Irish use of cavalry played a factor in their victory at Clontarf, whereas Dublin might have relied on pure infantry stance, while Brian could have used mobility to outflank his enemies?
No, I don't think cavalry played a role, because it turned into a horrible, this is my opinion now, it turned into a horrible grind that lasted from the morning all the way up to the evening. There didn't seem to be any, like with a lot of these skirmishes and battles, there's a point of penetration. Even during the Viking Age, there are different ways to try to either flank around the formation, or to use a boar snout or various other ways to penetrate the actual line itself. There are attempts throughout the day to try to penetrate the formation of the line. However, the line does not break. If we look at some of the sources, such as the War of the Gael and the Foreigners, and also other, like the Annals of Ulster, we don't see penetration of the line happening until the evening. And what happens is that the men of the Isles notice that and Bertie will bring this up as well, because Bertie actually believes he actually has the time from Dr. Sean Duffy from Trinity University. Professor Sean Duffy from Trinity University. Bertie sat down and had a very deep conversation with him. And it's believed, I think Bertie will correct me on this one, I think it was around 5 o'clock, around 5, 6 o'clock, the coastal water came in around the beach where the men of the Isles actually had their boat. So this has been proven scientifically, that around that time, the tide comes in and it brings out the boats. And the men of the Isles noticed this, and the men of the Isles were on the side of the men of Dublin and the men of Leinster, who were rebelling against the Emperor of the Scots at the time, Brian Boru, and they fled. And the moment they fled, the line formation had thinned out, allowing the the men of Munster, the men of Ireland at the time, led by Brian Boru, to flank the the left side of the formation. So they were allowed then to flank the left side of the formation, and then from there was a domino effect that happened on the battlefield. But it happened so quickly, it turned into a mass slaughter on both sides. And you also had people who were tripping over, even on Brian Boru's side, there were people who were killed who shouldn't have been killed, just because not only did people start freaking out because they were being flanked and started to flee the battlefield, but you also had people that were suddenly like princes, and which are Taoiseachtas in Irish, and also the Kings of Ireland, trying to get in there to try to get as many kills as possible so they can then bolster up and poems could be written about them. They got killed when they shouldn't have been killed. So for the whole day, you have these formations, barely, people are getting grinded up, numbers being killed, but the mass amount of slaughter only happens allegedly around 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. So it shows, because that literature has been written the way it is, that we don't have, you're talking about flank formations and happening with cavalry and stuff. And in the literature, I personally can't find anything like that, unless you guys can find anything.
No, it's not written in the sources. And I want to actually add to that, because the fact that it's not written in doesn't mean that there was another reason for it, because it's written at the Battle of Silkul in 968 that Brian uses cavalry in that battle, and there are sources that he does have quite a well-established cavalry unit, but they're mostly used for recce, reconnaissance, stuff like this. They're not. What I have a small theory on this, and so at the time, Donogh MacBreen is in South Leinster. South Leinster hasn't risen up, but at the same time, Donogh has been sent down to the south to do a bit of raiding to make sure that they stay compliant and don't try to join Northern Leinster in this rebellion. I would say that if Brian has a cavalry unit and it's not being used in it, possibly it could be in South Leinster doing the reconnaissance, doing the suppression of the South Leinster Kinsilla, stuff like that. Because Donogh actually ends up, according to sources, at the battle just after the battle happens. I think it's like a couple of days later. And I can't imagine he does that journey on foot that quickly upon hearing that his father's been killed, and he goes up there to and I don't know if he does it to press a claim or whatever, but I feel like if that's maybe where the cavalry would be, but that is speculation on my part. It's not based on anything apart from the fact we know he's got cavalry, but it's not used in the battle. So where is it?
But another thing
go
is
on.
having cavalry, having fighters on horseback is different from having people who are trained and whose horses are trained to go charging into a line of heavily armed men. Because you get on a horse and you start charging towards someone with spiky things sticking out, the horse doesn't want to go that way. And like the the shield walls that were quite often used, they're quite effective against cavalry, unless you're like what they call the cataract or cataphract, which is if you ever see, they're lovely to look at because they're horses in armor and they are men with loads of armor. They emerge at I think the 4th century, especially in the Middle East. They were not in Ireland. The Irish horse is small. The Irish didn't use stirrups. So if you get on a horse and go running towards a line of Norse warriors and you bash into them, you're going to fall off your horse.
Well, you're going to be killed by spear formation, yeah.
Yeah, if you don't get killed by a spear, crash into someone, you're going to bounce off the horse.
Yeah.
Physics. There's nothing to hold you in there. Caveman makes a good point. Do you think they use cavalry to reinforce the line in gaps? Quite often at that stage, in England as well, many soldiers would go on horseback to the battle and then get off the horse. Horses were good for reconnaissance, for scouting, for riding around people, not for attacking people.
So my Donogh theory is plausible.
Yeah. You could use them for throwing javelin. Like we do actually have plenty of sources of them going in and throwing a javelin and weakening down the lines, by throwing javelins. But no, and even with the Norman invasion of Ireland, the Normans introduced cavalry charges into Ireland. But that's even throughout the rest of Europe, cavalry charges are super unique. And you do, as you guys are pointing out there, stirrups, you need the correct stirrup, and also not just the correct stirrup, but the right technique. You are getting an animal, a creature, an innocent creature, and trying to teach it to car crash. You're teaching it to car crash into the bloody wall.
If you look at the Battle of Hastings, the Normans used their cavalry against the Saxon shield wall and failed.
Yes. Yeah,
they win.
But it's
as far as I know, they win by pretending to fall back or something and persuading the Saxons to leave their shield wall to attack.
Yeah.
And then they and that's when like a horse is good then, because you're running into groups of men who are not standing in a line
Yeah.
with pointy things. They're going every so get from the side. But like the cavalry wasn't used so much in Clontarf. It could have been used if it wasn't near a beach. If it was two armies maneuvering, cavalry could have been used to move men, as Caveman said. Here or
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, I do believe, don't get me wrong, I think the wife there did the research on it, and there seems to be an indication, because the roads, Brian Boru cleared the roads before the battle, and vice versa. The men of Dublin cleared the roads into that one. So if you actually look at the battle itself, the roads are clear for the entire battle, which makes sense of why the battle took so long to finish. Because you have constant rotation happening in the back. To do rotation and make sure the logistics are working, you need horses. So the horses are being used, but for logistic reasons, and also to make sure everything is moving and cycling at the background. So men are being killed, weapons are being broken, and food needs to be brought to the battlefield, right? People need to be fed, especially if fed and watered, right? Especially if we're going to fight for the entire day. So you need horses to do all that in the background, right? With the chariots. So chariots at this point are not used for any form of charges and stuff that we saw in 70 AD. Chariots at this point are used just exactly as they're used in the Táin Bó Cúailnge, to rotate, to help circulation at the background. Logistics are so insanely important. Caveman was asking as well, did Hobler horses, were they being used to come up and throw javelins during the Battle of Clontarf? I haven't, don't get me wrong, that is a tactic of the Irish. I just haven't seen any evidence of anyone jumping onto a Hobler horse, going over with a javelin and throwing them in. There seems to be indication of people using javelins. Javelins were used, but they seem to be used from a dismounted position. I just think at the time, you just throw better. If you're doing it dismounted, you do a better job throwing dismounted. I think the formations were too strong in the Battle of Clontarf. There was too much planning in the Battle of Clontarf. So I think that's why cavalry was nullified during the Battle of Clontarf. Because if you were... Go on.
I have a question for you, because this is obviously not my area of study. It's more your area. You're saying that obviously throwing a spear from a horse is harder, obviously, than throwing it. You're grounded. So I understand that as a but surely if you're riding a horse along your lines, you have a downward view on the enemy, even if it's just slightly. You have a down. So throwing a javelin from a horse, even if it's inaccurate, you're aiming at a blob, basically. And not only that, that blob has its shield pressed against another shield. So you basically have almost like guaranteed headshots. So wouldn't that be an effective tactic?
Well, you see, the thing is, that formation...
If you're on a horse, you're going up and down.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Horses go up and down. So you're going up and down, up and down, up and down. It's like you're like on a boat, except it's going faster.
Plus, these lads are in a... Go
on. If you look at archers don't fire straight.
Yeah.
They fire up into the air. Because like the curve. Sort of so if you fire going downwards, probably you're going to hit the ground. Like it's going to go into the ground. It's much easier to and you get a stronger throw from the ground. And like if you want to get a headshot, like you can get that as it's easier to aim. And I also think that javelins, you're not actually trying to kill people. You're trying to disrupt them. So you're just trying to hurt people and to annoy them. So they're going to fall over stuff. They're going to lift their shield. They're going to stop advancing. Like these are heavily armored guys. Most would have helmets on. So, and some would
Yeah.
have the thing over the eyes. So headshots are actually very, very different.
Also, just another note as well is that the shields aren't tied to the arm. The shields, they're holding shields from the grip. So when javelins, number one, some people are saying bows and crossbows, they were used at the time, but the Irish were better at javelins and slings. And actually, if you look at YouTube videos of archaeological what was it called? Experimental archaeology that was done with slings and javelins. You can see why people preferred in the 10th century to use javelins and slings over bows and crossbows in the 10th century. Okay, they're especially used in formation. So what's happening is that they're going into formation with their shield wall. When rivals are throwing stuff at them, they're adjusting. Like these guys are very switched on, very quick with their reactions. So, javelin comes in, they react, block it, and then vice versa. They throw it. They take a step back as a group and throw their javelins. Like people aren't happy-go-lucky just throwing javelins in. They would throw it as a group, and when you see it being thrown as a group, and a big wall of javelins being thrown into you, and then penetrating in. Even if you're trying to block one, the second one comes in, the third one comes in and penetrates your body, and they do penetrate through. Unlike bows that penetrate so far, javelin will go the whole way. So even if you block one javelin, multiple of them coming in will kill you. And those formation throws are better done dismounted than mounted. And I think on top of that as well, it depends on the geography at the time. You're assuming that you're throwing javelins downhill. We don't actually know who had the high ground or low ground, or if that was important during the battle itself.
I've walked around Clontarf and it's flat ground.
Yeah.
At the moment, the concern with building a wall in Clontarf against rising sea levels. Clontarf is flat. It's very flat. There's no, and there was a river there as well, so part of the ground would have been marshy. Some of the people are mentioning about Asian horse archers. Ireland is not a steppe. In the horse archers, they come from the steppe where you have hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, and you have large number of guys who grew up with herds of horses. They live on the horses. That doesn't exist in Ireland. It didn't exist in Ireland.
Well, I'm denying, like the comment section.
You need to be galloping for a certain time to get the momentum to fire and run away then. And you need a large amount of people. So you need large numbers of horses. That doesn't exist in Ireland.
Yeah, the comment section is trying to make out like I'm saying that people in Ireland didn't use the hobbler horse and didn't use javelins. I deny them throwing spears. By the way, I don't think they were throwing their spears. Spears were used to kill people, to poke people. Javelins. The Irish were definitely using javelins. Go on.
No, you're being pedantic with the whole spear and javelin thing. That comment means it is the same thing, and for all intents and purposes to the layman, they are the same thing. It's a stick with a piece of metal on it, sharp piece of metal on the end of it. So I'm with Tom on this one. Back off, Philip.
Javelins were completely different to spears.
To you,
you had to tie it up. You had to tie it up. So you have to get an entire string and tie it up in the back to get that throw in there. So the whole setup of a javelin and the technique around javelin, you can't just pick up a javelin and just throw it. You actually have to tie it up in the back so you have more of a stronger pull, because the purpose of it is to penetrate through. Go on.
There actually is another factor. If you're galloping on a horse to somebody, you're a bigger target. So if the other person has archers, if the other person has spearmen, javelin men, it's easier to hit you or hit your horse, and you come up. It's not being on a horse is okay. It's an advantage in some things, but you're easier to hit.
Yeah.
And if you're galloping across a battlefield, or one by a beach where the ground, and one by a river where the ground is boggy, there is a good chance your horse is going to fall.
Mm.
So it's the horse doesn't give you a necessary advantage.
Sean Duffy's The Battle of Clontarf 1014. That's a brilliant book. I think it's definitely 100% a must read. Jeez, my English is out the window this morning.
Oh, it's all right. It's all right for your English to be out the window, but not the comment sections, no.
Well, I'm trying. At least I'm trying to use English this morning. It is, what was it, 6 a.m. in the morning, like, so bear with me, like, in my English. What was it called? Yeah, I definitely would agree. Formations, it depends on the battle. Like, I'm not turning around and saying that javelins weren't, what people weren't mounted on hobbler horses and throwing javelins. It depends on the battle. It's just the problem is with the Battle of Clontarf, especially the conversation that myself and Bertie had last year, is it's way too open. That whole area is open in the wrong way, and it also doesn't allow for the flanks that other battles would allow. Where you see hobbler horses being used, like for example, the Battle of Kinsale. That seems to be a way allow, because of the way that the terrain is, allow for more use of cavalry compared to the Battle of Clontarf. The Battle of Clontarf just seems to be way open out in the main field itself, which doesn't allow for the usage of cavalry. Cavalry in that, but like there were horses there, but the horses are used in the back for logistic purposes. From my reading of the literature at the time, I just don't see. Maybe somebody did experiment during the battle and tried to bring out cavalry, because it is a long battle. It's a battle that starts early in the morning and goes all the way up to 5-6 o'clock in the evening, where you finally see a break in the battle. And even on top of that, the hacking afterwards. Maybe there was cavalry used in the hacking afterwards. It just isn't important. It's the fact that nobody's recorded this may highlight the fact that cavalry weren't used during the battle. But I also just can't imagine cavalry being used in battle because of the success of a formation of throwing javelins. But that's just my interpretation. I definitely would say go off and read Sean Duffy's The Battle of Clontarf to start with, as Kat there is highlighting.
What's that? Wait,
Dennis has a good point as well. Yeah.
Yeah, you're highlighting it the same.
Yeah, Dennis is one. Wait, Kinsale, I heard this weekend the stirrup thing wasn't right. The Irish didn't use stirrups, wasn't it? Owen O'Neill is the man actually there for that one.
No,
It was the English who were using stirrups.
Yeah. Someone just says Kinsale, pistols and cavalry. The English cavalry at Kinsale, most would actually have used javelins and stuff like that, or spears or swords. They weren't. They didn't use pistols. Some would have had pistols, but there was, in the 16th and 17th century, there was a maneuver called the caracole, which was because horses don't like to gallop into large bunches of pikemen with these very long pikes with pointy things at the end. So you would gallop up, fire your pistol, and turn around. So they would go around in a circle. That didn't happen at Kinsale. What happened was that the English cavalry charged the Irish cavalry, who turned and ran off. They ran straight into O'Neill's best men. And for some reason, O'Neill's men had formed, they would normally be scattered in a loose order, but they were all in one big group. So his horse ran straight through his infantry, and they lost all formation. And the English horse said, "Yay, great fun!" And they chased them away, because these guys, the only thing they could do was run.
Could you even use long ships? Not by the way that the river is. If you look at the river is close to Dublin. So using the long ships to flank around, where? Go on.
The Talca River. That's the name of it.
Yeah. The river is closer. The Talca River is, O'Neill said there. That's closer to Dublin. So trying to land the troops off and flank around would have been quite difficult during the Battle of Clontarf, especially when the opposing side, the Dalcash, would have just adjusted to it. So yeah, there is. Don't get me wrong. There is actually examples of long ships being used to flank around the enemy. So it is a tactic that is used. But during the Battle of Clontarf, the problem is the river to be used for flanking. The Dalcash had already tactically gone in front of it, so they waited their and they what was it called, the Vikings, the men of the Isles, do use their boats to dismount using the river. It's just that the Dalcash are already, well, the men of Munster are already in front of it to prevent them from being flanked. So Brian Boru is thinking tactically. He doesn't want his men being flanked, and he does set when he's setting up his formation, is preventing his military force from being flanked. It's a very good point. But the problem is Brian Boru is already thinking ahead and preventing any form of flanking from happening. It's interesting because I say he prevented flanking from happening, but ultimately, once the line has collapsed, it's people flanking around that go in and kill Brian Boru. So I turn around and say, "Oh look, he came up with all this counter flanking," but his men that were there to prevent flanking ran away to join in with the butchery that was happening in the front line. So it stopped. His for what was it? His bodyguards were gone. His Cleary had gone off to do butchery, which left Brian Boru, the Emperor of the Scotti, completely open to flanking. And it only what was it? Only was it very few. Only about 5 men were running by. Had seen Brian Boru by himself, and it was Broder who went over and chopped up Brian Boru. So I turned around and say, "Oh, Brian Boru, he was such a genius. He stopped all that flanking." But it was flanking that actually got him chopped up by very few Vikings. So,
well, I think he still, I know he did still have I believe some traditions state that he had 2 bodyguards, one of them being a kinsman, either a nephew or a cousin, young cousin, a younger. They're definitely younger members of the wider Dalcash kin group. Maybe young Fianna, just a few hadn't earned the right to go looting the battlefield or something like that, because I know that sources do state that one of them was his close kinsman, but does highlight youth or being young. So yeah, I mean. But that just shows the carnage, because obviously that's another point of battlefields that I suppose we've got to be raised, is that most battles are actually not very deadly. It's the aftermath that's the deadliest.
Yeah. This is another myth I want to crush as well from the Fat Controller. The Cleary, the royal war bands, did in fact have riveted mail. A lot of them, there's records of, especially the men of Dublin, covered in silk, and you would have definitely had elaborated helmets as well, as in helmets that would have been decorated with various designs and stuff similar to what you would have seen, maybe similar to what you would see in the Book of Kells. So the idea of the Irish being naked in the battle is a Victorian idea, where they literally jump all the way down to 300 BC and the Tomba Cooley. So they take sources away from the Battle of Clontarf itself. What was it called? The Cleary. We can see that by Professor Sean Duffy, where he highlights the fact that in 10th century Ireland, like every single archaeological dig in Ireland, highlights the fact that there was plenty of riveted mail in Ireland. You have to remember that before the Battle of Clontarf, we have massive conventional style warfare. And you just have, as Owen has pointed out as well, large amount of riveted mail coming into Ireland at the time. It just maybe there's a shortage from the e-nail side of riveted mail coming in. But the fact is, Brian Boru had full access to Waterford, Limerick, and Cork, and the Battle of Clontarf was planned well in advance before what was it called? The 23rd in 1014. They had been planning the Battle of Clontarf since 1013. And if we go back to the Battle of Tara, for example, in 980, both sides, especially the Clear Area, are well, set up. Now, the thing is that people are assuming that every single, because of sources like we see in 300 BC and also in the Tomba Cooley, everybody is assuming, and then other sources leading to the cattle raiders, the Kerns. Now, granted, the Kerns, a lot of them lack armor because they're designed for more cattle raiding warfare. They lack armor going into the battle, right? Granted, fair enough. You could say that the likes of the Ogluk, the likes of the cattle raiders, perhaps didn't have riveted mail because they're more designed for cattle raiding. But that's very debatable because even in the Tomba Cooley, we have the Fenian, the cattle raiders, who do put on some form of light armor, even debated if they had leather armor, which is something I kind of disagree with. But I have to highlight the fact that even if it's light armor, because of the fact that this was planned a year in advance, you have people that have a year to adjust to more conventional warfare rather than cattle raiding warfare. So like these people, are going off and putting their savings into their armor. So even if they do have padded armor, gammonsen, they're having something to protect themselves with. I cannot understand if you have a year, unless you're an alcoholic, why would you not buy armor? I understand that. Oh, well, my primary form of warfare that I am a part of as a cattle raider is cattle raiding. You have a year to prepare for a battle, so why would you not go off and invest in armor?
Yeah, I think
Gammonsen, go on.
I think also one thing that needs to just be really like underlined is that the Irish have been fighting the Norse for 200 years by this stage, so there's no shock to Norse tactics, to Norse weaponry. It's not like when the Normans first appear on the battlefield with the Irish, and even then the Irish aren't naive to their tactics or warfare either. But there's certainly elements in Ireland that will be second-hand, third-hand information, won't have seen it face to face. Pretty much every warrior in Ireland has come across a Norse faction of some kind, whether it been part of another Irish raid, part of whatever, that nobody's surprised by, and therefore have spent the 200 years figuring out, okay, well, every time I stab Olaf, he doesn't die because he's wearing metal on his chest. Maybe I should wear metal on my chest. And that's me downgrading the Irish to a very simple, barbaristic attitude when they don't have that. It's obviously far more complex than that. But what I'm saying is that it's almost a ridiculous idea to hold in your head. Now, and also battlefields, we're a warrior culture. We're also not only so you've got a warrior caste of people who are naturally going to be investing, like you say, in armaments, in weaponry, raiding battlefields after the dead. Armor and weaponry is not in short supply in medieval Ireland. Yeah,
I can understand if someone turns around. Now, Cleat Éire, the Royal War Band, were used for conventional fighting. So they did, and they had the money. They were backed by either a Ree or an Overking. So they had the backing to afford, not just afford, but it was demanded that they would go in and show off the bling, So it would be, very, very strange for them not to show up, not just in riveted mail, but to have various stuff to show off their their high status. Now, granted, if you're making the argument that cattle raiders didn't show up with armor, that's a fair argument to make. But they did have a year in advance to prepare for the battle itself. What was it called? The fact. Oh, and also on top of that, just before I finish the whole thing with armor, somebody else made a very, very good point as well. Is that even during 300 BC to 90 AD, with insular Latin culture coming into Ireland, Celtic culture as we referred to, that does bring in a high standard of smith ironwork into Ireland at the time. And with that, that brings in riveted mail. So yeah, I fully agree with that as well, that we had riveted mail and a high level of smith work coming into Ireland between 300 BC to 90 AD with Celtic culture. So the idea of naked Celts, it's there, don't get me wrong. We do have the likes of Tom Cooley, which gives us an idea of naked Cuchulainn running around. But at the same time, you still also come in with, the classic Celtic riveted mail as well. Just popping over to another question that the fact controller brings in. Sorry.
If there's yeah, it's we're at the 2-hour-5 mark, so I'm thinking maybe if we wait next week about the progression of warfare, weaponry, armor in Ireland through the early medieval to right up to the 9 Years' War. We could certainly make that next week's chat.
Yeah, I just want to make one last point there about chariots in the Battle of Clontarf. Actually, if we look at Clonmacnoise, if we look at the effigies, especially with Flann Sinna, there's a cross in the middle, the cross that's in the middle of Clonmacnoise. If you look at that effigy, it shows Flann Sinna on a chariot. So we do know that chariots were used, and also the description that's in the Tomba Cooley. We know that chariots were used for parades. So the purpose of parades, we can see in the effigies, was done in the 10th century. And on top of that as well, if we look at the descriptions for both the Battle of Clontarf and the Tomba Cooley, we have a very good indication that chariots were used for logistic purposes. Now, granted, it's still a massive debate. We do not have, as of yet, a chariot found in Ireland. So for you to turn around and say that chariots were not used is still a fair argument because of the fact that we don't have archaeological evidence to do so. So I'm not dismissing that there's an argument there. There is, because there's no archaeological finds to prove it, but there is an argument to make because of the description in the Tomba Cooley, and also the fact that we have effigies in Clonmacnoise that indicates the usage of chariots in the 10th century for parades and for logistic purposes.
Right.
That's me done.
Right. So there you go. We're going to end there because we're over the 2-hour mark here. But if I think maybe we'll just make it next week, we can just talk about the progression of warfare through the early medieval right up to this.
Sounds good.
So it's and that way everyone, that kind of covers a period we all sort of specialize in as well. So and can answer all the questions. So, I know that it's late for Owen and I. Unlike you across the water, and Philip, who's now probably finally awake after,
No, I'm going back to bed. my coffee, what was it called? The caffeine is done. I'm going back to bed again. It's still 7 a.m. as well.
And then especially we can also explain on maybe how women, helped within campaigns and warfare. That'd be actually a really good, interesting thing to look at too. It's not covered enough, so we'll look at that. So. I think we'll just start saying thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks. Yeah, huge thank you to everybody. It means so much. And everybody who has given us any form of donations today, that means so much to myself, Micheál, and Dr. Owen O'Neill. Lads, I'll be back on again, around 10 p.m. tomorrow over on Patreon Irish time. I think in New York it's around 6 p.m. I'm covering the reason why the Scottish War of Independence started, which brings us up to the very start of that amazing movie, Braveheart. Completely historically accurate, lads. Definitely take my word on that one. Regardless, tomorrow I want to show a presentation in investigating why the Scottish War started legally. What is the legal reason for the start of the Scottish War of Independence? So I have a presentation on that to give tomorrow over on Patreon at Irish Medieval History. So if you're interested in that, definitely head on over to my Patreon, give an old nosy. If you just want to support the channel, you can give whatever donation you'd like, but the presentation itself is about 20 quid. Okay, so it's about $20. So head on over there if you're interested in that. and I give a presentation every Sunday night. What's it called? Mihal, do you have any plans for the rest of the week, or are you just going off to any plan for the week? No.
I have a video on the Quins coming out, just really short.
Nice.
And then
That's actually one of my relations.
There you go. And then, but anyone that's just wanting a wee top up for history throughout the week, I've started posting every day on the Facebook group page, except for days when I stream, because obviously I need the day to do a bit of remind and revise on research. So, but if you're wanting to see some activity about kings, clans, histories, or anything like that, check the Clans of Dynasties group page. But if you want to support the channel, just like the videos, share them, comment on them. That'd be great. On all socials, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, all that sort of thing. So thanks very much, guys. That's all you need to do for me. It's just watch my boring mug.
Dr. Owen O'Neill, I know there's dozens of things you want to disagree with this week. And you've been literally, just before the thing even started, there was a good few stuff that you want to disagree with on social media. Can you give us a little bit of a glimpse of your plans for this week and the type of arguments you want to be involved with?
Well, for personal reasons, I haven't been doing much for the last few weeks.
Yeah.
It's been a complicated period, but I'm planning to return now. Dennis, who was here a few months ago, he gave me a very nice tour of Kinsale. So I'm planning to start a series on the Battle of Kinsale. I have the first draft written, but it's about 5 hours long. So I've got to do editing. So
Just a wee bit.
I'm hoping to come out with videos on the Battle of Kinsale. I'm going to be doing a few shorts, like 2-minute shorts about some other topics as well. But I'm going to be going back, hopefully, over the next few weeks when I out for stuff on Kinsale. I keep an eye out for my shorts, etc. And I have a Buy Me a Coffee account. You can, if anyone wants to drop a donation to, it's always very helpful.
What's the name of your Buy Me a Coffee account?
Buy Me a Coffee, Forrest Rasta.
Forrest Rasta, happy days.
I know, on all my videos. Just look in the video. You'll find the information.
What was it called? I try to stay away from the videos these days because it's just not pushed by YouTube right now. I think YouTube has gone pure short crazy. You know, the little 3-minute clips. So I personally, if anybody's wondering why I haven't been releasing any videos, it's just I release a video and it only gets 90 views. I've got 30,000 subscribers, and yet I release a video and it does not get pushed whatsoever. It gets 100 views, and it was the same. I was talking to Rachel on the Creative Contessa, and she's exactly the same. Only 100 views, and she's on 20,000 subscribers. But yeah, her shorts and it's same my shorts. Go on.
Then I'm not doing too bad.
Oh yeah, so you're flying so I definitely would say if you're not doing too bad, but I just find YouTube just does not care for videos right now. It's all about the shorts. So I kind of, if anybody's wondering what I'm up to, I'm basically putting everything into shorts right now, and there's tons of topics that I want to focus on this week when it comes down to the shorts and stuff. So I definitely would say pay attention to my Patreon and the old shorts. But other than that, guys, thanks so much for all the support. And other than that, Slán go bhaile. I'll see you later.
Slán.